Kicking off next week, so let's get to BLG, who's set to join us now from Bleeding Green Nation. Brandon Lee Gouton joining the show right here. You can follow him on X at Brandon Gouton. Read all his work at bleedinggreennation.com. BLG, under a week to go from the Eagles reporting for camp. How you feeling on this Wednesday morning, brother?
Yeah, it's good. It will be out there in a week's time at the NovaCare complex to see these players actually practice in person, and it's always a good time.
Yeah, it's exciting to get started again. And it's been I would say overall, a very calm off season, BLG. Would you agree with that? Other than CJ popping up every once in a while, as he did again yesterday. I thought it was interesting, his description. He didn't say Howie. We all know it's Howie, he's explaining the phone call, and he says, "Hey, buddy." that's Howie right away. So he gave that away. But I thought it was interesting that CJ confirmed, hey, man, if they couldn't trade him, they were going to cut him. Other than that, boy, really quiet off season, which is rare.
Yeah, that was a big takeaway from their spring practices. It's just that, especially when you compare it to other teams around the league, the Commanders, most notably, yesterday with the Terry McLaurin situation. Yeah. There's no drama here. It's a drama-free operation. And obviously, too, the offseason felt really short because when you're in the Super Bowl, things get pushed back. So, it's a drama-free environment right now. I think it's really an environment that you kind of almost like couldn't be happier with if you're an Eagles fan, coming out of winning the Super Bowl, and there's a lot of, credit and praise for a lot of the players on the Eagles, but obviously you have the Jalen Hurts discourse too. And I think that only really, regardless of what you think, I only think that helps him in terms of how he feels about things and how he might feel slighted and how that might motivate him.
Yeah, I agree. He's a chip on the shoulder guy. I think it just helps Jalen Hurts. I don't know if they put him number one. I think that might hinder him. I don't know how he'd handle that. And it's sort of like, to use the Eagles as a whole, to use Nick's messaging as a whole, like everybody not knows how to handle, but everybody knows they're going to have to handle adversity. Handling success is a little bit different. And sometimes it's harder because you're expecting the adversity. And now everybody's blowing smoke up your what, and telling you how great you are. How do you handle that? That to me can be more difficult. And we're going to see how the Eagles handle it. But since you brought up the Jalen stuff, I don't know. Look, I've been upfront about this, BLG. I don't think he had his best season. I would have put him ahead of Jared Goff. I would have put him ahead of Matthew Stafford, who to me is a great quarterback, but he's a little bit descending. Everybody else, you can argue, that's about where he belongs. Where are you in the disrespect conversation?
Yeah, I think when you look at that list, like you said, there's certain names on there that I think are just tough. I think even Jaden Daniels, I think Daniels' upside, I'm a big Jaden Daniels believer in the upside, but also you have to factor in it's 1 year. And we haven't seen how, the NFL is going to react to him. We all would have had CJ Stroud, a lot higher last year after his rookie season than we did after his sophomore season. So I just think, I'd like to see a little bit more of a sample size there. That's not even me being a Jaden Daniels hater. It's just, I want to see sample size when we're talking about top five. It's a pretty, distinguished category at that point. So, look, you can always quibble, with a couple of spots. I think the tiers are always the more interesting way to go. Which guy belongs in what tier here. And I don't think Jalen's in that top tier. I don't. I think that's a rarefied air. And in fairness, some of those guys in that top tier haven't had the Super Bowl success. And that's obviously a weird thing to reconcile with. Not even just in terms of winning it, but even making it. Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Joe Burrow made one. So it's kind of it's weird to parse through ultimately. But I do think Jalen has been a little bit undervalued league-wide, especially when you're seeing things like, this wasn't the ESPN rankings, but there's other ones out there by pretty notable quarterback or film watchers who have Geno Smith above Jalen Hurts. It's what are we doing at that point?
Yeah, well, I agree. It depends on the list. I agree with that. Some, the ESPN one I think is more valuable because it is coaches, executive scouts. So it's a little bit more valuable. But, you know, to the point of, and I know a lot of Eagles fans think the league is jealous or they disrespect the Eagles or whatever. But, I mean, Lane and Jordan are top 5. Zach Baldwin was number 3. Landon was top 5. Dallas was top. You know, like, that's what they think. And I want to throw this. This is a part that I think most people don't get. And I want to throw it at you, BLG, and see what you think about it. Most of the league, so especially with coaches and execs, most of the league doesn't want to play the way the Eagles play. So by nature, they're probably more going to lean towards a different style of quarterback, a higher volume style, whatever description you want to use. You know, nobody wants to spend 5 years to build this offensive line and go out and find the guy who can rush for 2,500 yards. Good luck copying that. So you're trying to get Joe Burrow. And I think most of them are going under their philosophy of what they want in a quarterback, which is different for the Eagles. Because if you tell me, I'd rather have Jalen Hurts for the Eagles than Justin Herbert for the Eagles. But the other 31 teams, I probably have more taking Justin Herbert's a better fit. Does that make sense? Did I make sense at all?
Well, I think that kind of goes into what people often say about Jalen, and that he's, you know, the right quarterback for this team. Like, I think that's a big, you know, point,
which I think is fair. Yeah,
sure. But then, you know, I think it's kind of unfair from the standpoint of, like, for people to just be like, well, if you put this player, you know, in the Eagles situation, he would do this. I mean, maybe, but you don't know that. That's not reality. Like, we don't know that. For
well,
sure.
you can
think about it. You can wonder, but that's not the reality of. It's not the framework we're discussing it in. So, I think that's also where it kind of gets. It's almost like people are getting credit for that. It's like for getting credit for something they didn't do, but you're just projecting them to do.
Yeah, right. BLG, what do you think it's going to look like this year for Jalen? I think 4 years starting. I think it's fair to say each year looked a little different, right? He's been asked to be a different quarterback each different year. Maybe that's one of the reasons he's not in the top of the list on for some of these people is that, you know, they had running game last year. They had Saquon. They had the defense. What do you think it looks like for Jalen Hurts this year? How does it change from what it was last year?
He's probably going to have to throw the ball more. Just, you know, looking back at his first 3 seasons here, he had 432 attempts in his second season. He had 460 in 2022. He had 538. It's probably too many in 2023. He had 361 last year. that's like a big drop off from those previous seasons. So he's probably going to be more so in the 400 range somewhere this season after being at 361 last year in the regular season. So we've all talked about that. We know that Saquon Barkley, I mean, I'm not one to doubt that guy. If anyone might be able to do something crazy, I'm not going to rule it out. But just from a standpoint of he's unlikely going to be able to carry the same kind of workload that he did last year. And then you have these really good wide receivers who, John, you talked about, you know, the Eagles want to play a certain way, or at least last year. I think, you know, big picture, we all know Jeffrey Lurie is a fan of passing the ball and has pretty much said that. He's also a fan of winning, so I'm not going to say like you're not going to just do it to do it. If it turns out that you try to do it again and it's not effective and you can still run the ball, you're going to lean into what works. But at some point, they're probably going to have to try to pass the ball significantly more than they did last year.
Yeah, and I think, you know, probably the personality of the season is going to demand they pass more. So some of that will correct it, will be self-correcting, most likely, unless you have the number 1 defense again, unless you have a 2,000-yard rusher again, which is possible, but if you're playing the odds, probably unlikely. And as we sit here on the precipice, BLG, I said, well, what about this team worries me the most? And I keep going back to, not that it worries me, but I keep going back to edge rusher. I go, that to me has a chance to go. If you say what can go really poorly, to me, I'd look straight at edge rusher. Where do you look?
I think that's fair from a standpoint of you win the Super Bowl, there's a honeymoon period of like everything's great with the roster. There's no flaws. Everything's perfect. You kind of think more of everyone than they might be necessarily. It's possible, I would say, and I'm a big Nolan Smith believer, a big Jalen Hunt believer. But sometimes, as a team, not just unique to the Eagles, you get too high on your own young players, and you kind of, you're a little bit biased there, and you don't maybe get the necessary help that you should have gone. And maybe, Uche and maybe Ojulari, maybe they're one of those or both of them step up and they're good and they're part of the rotation there. But let's just say, that Nolan Smith and Jalen Hunt play up to the Eagles' expectations. If one of those guys gets hurt, where are you all of a sudden there with your edge rusher situation? Like that's not a good spot to be in, I think, especially because I think Ojulari might just be okay. Uche, we'll see if he even makes the team or not. I don't think it's like 100% lock.
No,
I think he will.
Lock.
Right, but I don't think it's a guarantee. So I think I'm more comfortable believing in the upside of the starters. I think that's okay. I'm not going to criticize them for doing that, but I do think like the depth behind them and kind of just banking on that is a little bit shaky.
How much questions for Vic Fangio, BLG? I mean, a lot of talking to new players, and I think it's valid. I mean, there's a lot of young players, a lot of returning players, a lot of youth on the defense, but how long is it going to take Vic to figure it out? I mean, you got moving pieces. You got some guys who are injured, some guys who are coming back. Do you want Cooper inside, outside? Who's your safety? Who's your corner? I think there's a lot of questions for Vic, and it might take him a little bit of time to figure out who he wants playing where, when he wants them there, how much he wants them there, and all those different questions. How much time you given this defense to get acclimated this season?
It's fascinating to think about what we're going to see from Vic Fangio in year 2 with the idea that we all talked about last offseason and maybe even early into the season is that it could take some time for the Vic Fangio defense to really come together. And a common example was how the Dolphins defense in 2023 kind of took some time for them to get really playing their best football by the end of that season. So we'll see here, now that Fangio has had the benefit of being here for an entire year. Now you could say the drawback there is that teams have had more time to look at what specifically he did last year and with this team. Now, obviously, Vic has been in the NFL for a long time, so teams have had a lot of time to look at what not only he's done, but also some of his underlings have done with different teams too. So I don't think it's a matter of he's going to be figured out. But I do think that, having an extra year here and having these players comfortable in the system and just the way they talk about him and the reverence they have for him and what he does as a coordinator, and basically saying he's like a genius or he's like, he's a really high level thinker. I think that's intriguing to think about. I think this defense could hit the ground running and be strong from the jump.
We don't, there is so much uncertainty with that defense. And to your point about Vic and his ability to get guys up to speed and what he did last year. I mean, that's what he did with Zach Bond and Quinion Mitchell as a rookie, Cooper DeJean as a rookie, et cetera, et cetera. But offensively, I mean, 10 of 11 starters are back. They're all good to great. And then you got the lone spot, Tyler Steen. I want your Tyler Steen meter, and I want it for week 1 and week 8. In other words, percentage, he's the week 1 starter, percentage, he's the week 8 starter. Because I'm at like 95% he's the week 1 starter.
Yeah.
Week 8?
I was going to say 90 for week 1. I'm pretty confident. The only thing that concerns me is injury, because we've seen him. That was obviously.
Well, I'll take injury off the board if he's healthy. He's healthy.
If he's healthy, then I'm going to say like 95 or 99. Like pretty confident he's going to get the first crack at the job. It would take like a disastrous training camp for him. He would have to get hurt, but if we're rolling that out, otherwise he would just have to really painfully, obviously struggle throughout and basically kind of be unplayable. I think for him to not at least get a chance to start, and then you can adjust from there. Week 8, I'll go 80%. I'm a big Tyler Steen believer. I think it's possible that he might be playing out of position, ideally, and that he might be a better tackle. I know he doesn't have the length, but having seen him there in practice, I liked what I saw. But I do think, I've said with him, considering that he played defensive tackle for Tennessee and then he moved to left tackle for Alabama, that it's not crazy to me that he would take time in the NFL to kind of need to adjust to then a new position in guard. And when I look at how the Eagles have performed when he's been in the lineup, and it's obviously not all just him, he's playing with a really good offensive line, but they're 4-0. And they've had some of their best games offensively. Like they're averaging over 30 points per game. They're averaging over 300 yards per game. The point being that he's not the driver of the success, but he hasn't been such a liability that you've had to get him out of there or the game was wrecked. And if you're the standard for your worst offensive lineman, which he is from their starters, is that he doesn't destroy the game, you could be in a worse spot. So I think he's going to do well. And if he doesn't, I do think Matt Pryor will be the first person up to kind of slide in there if they need to kind of, he's like the, break glass in case of emergency option there.
Yeah, I'm with you. A little bit less high. The only little bit less high will be there. I get an Isaac vibe. The first time they tried to make Isaac the starter, he got benched for Wisniewski. Right. I think that might happen. Not that, maybe you take a step back and Isaac developed into a very good player a couple of years later. So I get sort of that vibe, but that's more about Matt Pryor. Like, I think Matt Pryor can play. He had a good season last year. And I think ultimately he's their best right guard option. So why not your Super Bowl contender? Why not play him? That's my theory.
He has that size too that, the Eagles obviously lost in Mekhi Becton and Tyler Steen doesn't quite have.
Yeah. So a lot of things to me point to Matt Pryor should be in there, but we'll see how it shakes out. Those are rich people problems because the Eagles are so good on the offensive side of the football. I was thinking about this, and I want to throw it at you, BLG. If there is a Zach Bond surprise, I'm not talking first team all pro, but somebody we're not thinking about that's going to be impactful. You got a player, you say, well, maybe this is a path to this guy being a contributor, or maybe not because they are so entrenched in most positions.
I think Uche has that, kind of potential from, we've seen the high watermark, right? With the production that he had, that it's 1 year and it's a few years ago now. And again, I just had said that he might not even make the team.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about like upside and that kind of upside, I think that's where I'm looking at. Like, I think Ojulari might have a safer floor, but I don't know if he has quite the ceiling that Uche has here. And I just think hearing about him from Lane Johnson, Lane Johnson brought him up unprompted when he was asked about the defensive line, the edge rushers first. Zach Bond talked about how, basically he was talking to Uche about how, this could be an opportunity for you. Or I think Uche kind of expressing, I really kind of want to revamp my career like you were able to. I think, it's one thing to say it, but I think just to have that kind of mindset of like knowing where you are, being like, wow, this is kind of maybe a make or break situation for me. And maybe I can make this big leap that people don't expect me to take. And with the edge rusher position, kind of there's snaps there that are up for grabs, I would say, if not for the starters, at least, rotating in there. I think maybe, he might have that kind of ability to have a big season and be their kind of free agent gem that Zach Bond was last year.
What do you think Jalen Hunt can be this year, BLG? I mean, adding the edge rusher room, I think John's probably right where he says people are skipping steps on Jalix. He was a developmental player when he was drafted a year ago. Had a solid end of the year, but I think now people are expecting him to be really good. I'm kind of in that camp. What are you expecting from Jalix Hunt this year?
Yeah, I don't know in terms of the production. I don't know that he's going to be a double-digit sack guy this year. But I mean, I'm not going to rule it out from a standpoint of I think that this guy has an exciting ceiling. The thing I expect from him is just that he's kind of just he's everywhere kind of player. Like, that's what I think we've seen from him at his best. Might not necessarily be piling up the sacks, but he's active as a run defender. He's getting pressure. He's just, there he is again. I'm not even specifically watching Jalix Hunt on this snap, but he's just popping off the screen once again. I think that's the kind of player he can be, and we've seen from him, even just seeing some of the things we saw in the spring. And he had that really good practice to end the spring that you can see how he's just active and how I think absolutely you make a leap from year one to year two. I mean, just the leap he made last season I thought was pretty incredible. And honestly, where he started from. I mean, in training camp, think we all expected pretty much nothing from him, a guy who might not even play much as a rookie. And he looked way more advanced than that. Not to the point, where he should be starting or anything, but he just looked like, oh, this guy looks like he might be able to actually contribute snaps this year. Sure enough, he was. And now I think it's absolutely possible he makes a leap from year 1 to year 2. I think the mentality with Jalen Hunt is there. And I've always liked that about him, just seeing his personability and his mindset. I think he absolutely realizes I don't think he's going to coast, on a rookie season where, okay, I did better than people expected.
Right.
I think he's hungry for that leap.
Yeah, I am high on Jalen Hunt. I just think, as Zander said, I think people are expecting a little bit too much out of him. But I think the biggest positive is that when Vic was forced to play him last year, which surprised me. I don't know if it surprised you, BLG, but Vic played him as a run defender. He liked him as a run. And I'm like, this is a pass rusher. I thought he would be a disaster there. Similar to Nolan Smith. People assume Nolan Smith is a bad run defender because he weighs 237. And he's actually phenomenal at it, setting the edge. And that surprised me about Jalen Hunt. So I think that is a positive to getting to that 3-down sort of ability that Vic wants and that Bryce Huff didn't have. I think that's a huge positive for Jalen Hunt. But boy, I mean, I think it's one of those things where Josh Sweat was just kind of a good player. And for whatever reason, anytime I just talked about this before you came on, there's a lot of like, well, Milton's gone. Josh is a really good player. Really consistent player. I just think it's difficult to replace that with, think about how long it took Josh Sweat to get to be Josh Sweat.
Mm-hmm.
Milton Williams, think about how long it took Milton Williams to be Milton Williams. That's probably going to happen again. Maybe it doesn't with Chalix. Maybe it doesn't with Morrow. Maybe it does. But not everybody's going to hit the ground running and be as good as the player that left. That's the concern for me on the defensive side.
Yeah, I agree with that point, and that especially stands out to me at cornerback. Like, I just think that, Quinion and Cooper were so good last year that it's entirely possible, like, they're not as good this year, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they're going to, like, be a bust. It just means that, like, the player development path doesn't necessarily just continue to rocket straight up. They could be, and at cornerback, too, which is a volatile position, or can be.
It's like a reliever. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that's where I'm kind of like almost like worried for their sake in terms of like how they might be perceived. I don't think fans are going to get on too much, but I just do think that it could be a little bit much to expect those guys to be that awesome again this year. And they are young, and I do believe in their upside. So maybe they will be good or better. But I'm not saying they can't. I just think that's the position where there could be some kind of step back.
Speaking of, since you brought up corner, how much different do you think it is Quinion moving to the left side? Because that's the dominant side for right-handed quarterbacks. That's why you put your best cornerback on the left side. That's where Slay played. Mm-hmm. Is that just alone going to guarantee sort of that little bit of downtick, or do you think it's not that big of a deal?
Yeah, I think you could make the case, he might see more targets than he did last year because of that, and might be tested a little bit more. Of course, you could also say that maybe they won't be because you have Keeley on the other side, and teams might want to go after him a little bit more and test him a bit more, given that he's less proven. But yeah, I just think there's some certain times last year where it feels like Quinion wasn't really even being tested, and I do think he's probably going to be tested a little bit more than he is this year playing in that spot. But I don't think it really matters where he plays. I think I think he is going to be the same kind of player regardless.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see about that, BLG. Coming in, I got a question on start of the year. Is it fair to say the offense has to carry more water than the defense? Last year, a lot of people said, the defense was kind of a bigger reason, even with Saquon and everything. Well, you got all those questions coming on defense. You got the questions with Vic that we talked about. How much more does the offense have to hold in especially those first couple weeks in order to get some wins out early in the season?
Yeah, I do think that's fair, considering you have the moving parts on defense, and you very much do not, with the exception of Tyler Steen, who, is new to starting if he's the starter, but was still here in the team on the team too. Whereas you have guys from outside the building, in the lineup or contributing at least to the lineup this year on defense, depending on how things shake out there. So, and there's going to be drop off. I mean, the defense was so good last year that in a league where defensive performance year over year can kind of really fluctuate, like it's just probably not going to be as good. It can still be pretty good. It's still going to be very good, but I don't think it's going to be to the same exact level as the team that allowed the fewest offensive points in the NFL last year. I think that's a very high bar for them to clear. So I do think it's on the offense too, especially kind of just with the context of last season and how much, like you said, the defense carried the weight. I think it's time for the offense to step up a bit here.
In the NFC East, let's take it to that as a whole. We had Mike Gill on earlier. He was talking about a sort of, it's Washington-based sort of blog that claimed 11 Commanders players could start on the Eagles. I don't know if you saw it.
Oh, I saw it.
I kind of chuckled a little bit, but they're very hyped up. I do think it's a good team. I think they've gotten a little bit better. But I also think they overachieved last year. Like, I don't think they were an NFC championship level team. And I think that was proven in the game. They weren't really ready for that spot. And they it showed. So I think they're a good team. I think they're better. But I don't think they're quite at the Eagles level yet. What do you think of the Command? And you mentioned some of the on-field, Terry McLaurin's upset right now. So they're having some drama. Where do you think the Washington Commanders are?
Yeah, there could be some more contract drama, if not this year, then next year, because you look at Laramie Tunsil's contract. I don't think he's in the final year of his deal next year. Marshawn Lattimore, not a lot of guaranteed money left on his deal. Like, these could be some issues. And as a whole, I just think I'm honestly, the most thing I'm looking forward to the most in the 2025 NFL season is how the Commanders do, because I just think this team, I think the fans have gone so overboard in being like, this team has arrived and everything's good now just because Dan Snyder is gone. And look, I'm sympathetic from a standpoint of they've had to deal with a lot of BS. Good for them that they actually have. And I'm not a huge Josh Harris fan, but he's at least, a competent owner the way that Dan Snyder is not. So, good for them to finally have something to be excited about and celebrate. But I just think it surprises me from a standpoint. You've seen a lot of things go wrong for this team, and it's not just the owner. The owner is a very big part of it, but it wasn't just him. There's other things that go wrong, and I would just think that there would be some kind of, let's see him do it again this year. Let's not just assume that just because they made it to the NFC Championship game in year one that they're definitely, kind of like I was saying about with Quinion and Cooper. Like, you can't just assume the progress is going to be linear and they're going to continue to straight up. I said in the past that I don't really love what they did this offseason in terms of they got all these old players, and I understand the idea of trying to win now on Jaden Daniels' rookie contract, but I think you can do that while also not going to the extent that they did on relying old, maybe declining players, and instead kind of trying to get some more pieces who could be a core and kind of more closer to Jaden Daniels' age and be these long-term options around him. So I just think the Commanders are in for some humble pie this year and their fans, considering how much, those one-score games they won last year, not sustainable, considering how they were healthy in some ways, considering how their schedule is going to be a lot more difficult this year. I think that's a team that's going to be humbled, and I think it's going to be a team that maybe they realize that they weren't as close as they thought they were, and maybe they bounce back in 2026.
All right, well, humble pie, you heard it from BLG, so I'm going to get you on the record now. That means the Eagles are winning the NFC East. It's over. The big, long 2-decade stretch, we're going to have back-to-back end because the Cowboys aren't winning the NFC East. The Giants aren't winning. Or do you think the Cowboys and Giants are ready to take a step up and be the last place team, worst to first type situation? I don't see it. So if it's not the Commanders, who can take the NFC East away from the Eagles? Or are you giving it to them?
I'm gonna predict the Eagles to win it against my better judgment, because it just never happens. But I do think I believe in the Cowboys more from the standpoint of I think I think they're going to be they're going to bounce back from where they were last year. They're not going to be quite that bad. A lot of things went wrong for them. I don't think they're I'm not believing in them as a contender. I just think that they're going to be the biggest obstacle to the Eagles. The Eagles have struggled, obviously beating that team at times. And it's not in the way that I think it gets overblown that like Dak Prescott owns the Eagles, because since he's been their quarterback, the Eagles have won 2 Super Bowls. He hasn't been this like massive obstacle for them. And a lot of those games too have been like overtime or like down to the wire. Doesn't mean he owns them. It means it's a competitive game. And by the way, a couple of those games, the Cowboys won the coin toss in overtime, which is a big advantage. That's more luck than owning them. But I do think they're going to bounce back. Although the thing I will say about them is Brian Schottenheimer might be a disaster. I think people are just glossing over that. Maybe not, but the resume isn't great, and no one else wanted him to be the head
I think
coach.
it was a very strange hire. I'm with you. I mean, I think the Eagles' huge advantage over the Cowboys is their owner. Owner versus owner.
Absolutely.
One does it the right way, one doesn't. Not from a business standpoint. Jerry's great from a business
100%.
standpoint.
From a football standpoint.
Yeah.
Yep.
And last thing on them is that your mileage may vary when it comes to the gambling stuff, but I think their over/under win total is like 7.5.
Yeah,
that's alarmingly low. And you might be like, well, the betting places are suckers. I'm going to take the over. Well, good luck with that. I mean, I don't think they're suckers. I think that's a suspicious.
Well, there's a reason they're all in big buildings, BLG, and everybody walks out of there losing money.
Right. Exactly.
All right, last question for you, BLG. I'm going to put you on the spot real quick before I let you go. Training camp's a week away. So next time we talk to you, they'll have already reported for camp. Give me one bold prediction for the Eagles this year. It could be anything. It could be win the Super Bowl. It could be a top 5 defense. Whatever comes to mind, give me one bold prediction for the 2025 Eagles season.
I mean, winning the division twice in a row counts as a bold prediction to me.
I agree.
They can't do that. So
in this division, it is.
Yeah, I'm just going to stick with that and say they actually are the team. Like that, as much as that sounds like, maybe lame for another, like the Chiefs have been just doing that every year, apparently.
Yeah. Or the Bills, who
I
think are basically assured of the AFC East title.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, they're wrapping it up by like week 15 or whatever.
Yeah. It might be Thanksgiving for that.
Yeah.
And I don't even think Bills are
20 years or 21 years would that be the first time? 21?
2004 season was the last time.
2004.
Yeah.
So that counts as a bold prediction for sure. Yeah, BLG, thanks for doing it, man. We appreciate you doing it all off season. Now the fun begins. So we'll have a little bit more to talk about, obviously, on the segments. We appreciate you doing it all summer and looking forward to continuing to talk to you through the year. Make sure you guys follow him at Brandon Gouton and read all his work at bleedinggreennation.com. Thank you, BLG. We'll talk to you next week, man.
Thanks.
Well, we won't. We'll be on the practice field, BLG.
Oh, yeah. It might be a night.
We'll talk about the schedule, but yeah, we'll get them on but obviously things are going to change in training camp. So, and Wednesday's the first day. So he'll be down there. I'll be down there, obviously. And we'll have a night show that day, but yeah, it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah, it's coming quick, Johnny Mac. It's coming quick, man. 5 minutes left to play here on Birds 365 today. 2 good guests today, Mike Gill and BLG, as always. Mike, you could tell by the way Mike's talking. He's definitely not – he's got some concerns on this team. You can tell. He's brought them up several times throughout the offseason. He brought them up again today. You can tell Mike's not entirely there yet. I'm thinking the golden era of the Eagles will continue this season.
Well, I think there's legitimate questions on the defensive side of the football, legitimate concerns. And I think, I think anybody who listens to this show knows I like Vic Fangio a lot. I have tremendous respect for him. And I think he's the best defensive coordinator in football. He's also been around a long time, and I always say talent trumps coaching, scheme, whatever, all the time. The Eagles have a ton of talent, more tilted toward the offensive side of the ball now because of who they lost on the defensive side. Vic has been around for a very long time. and he's been the best defensive coordinator in the NFL for about 15 years now. When he was a head coach, you know what I mean, defensive minded. He's the guy everybody's been copying. He's the guy everybody tries to look at when it comes to defensive football in the NFL. It's been that way for a long time, over a decade. He doesn't always have the number one defense. He's mortal. So I'm not, as much as I respect him, as much as good as I think he is, that doesn't mean he can turn chicken shit into chicken salad. You need good players.
Right.
And what I think the Eagles have, and I think the positive part is they have guys with upside. But, at all these positions we're talking about, Moro Ajomo, Jalix Hunt, Kaylee Ringo, Jeremiah Trotter, Drew Makuba, Sidney Brown, even if you want to throw that in there. They have players with upside. So that's the positive part. But to assume it's going to be seamless, to Mike's point, I don't think that's going to happen.
We'll see how it all shakes out, Johnny Mac. Great show today, brother. We've had a great off season. I think we've held strong. We've had a lot of great topics. I don't know. I think our viewers are more prepped for the season than maybe any Eagle fan, anywhere, from all the content we've given them this offseason, all the talking points that we've had. And we're now ready to rock, Johnny Mac. The season is nearly upon us, brother. So I'm excited to get it done, man. I'm excited to get started.
I was looking at the Eagles roster. Well, I had my copy of the roster out yesterday, and I wanted to check if I talked about every single player on the roster, and I believe I have on this show. So I think you're more prepared than everybody else.
And the other thing we're going to talk about later this week, John, we got two shows left on the week, obviously, and then we're in the next week. I want to talk about the bubble players too. So that might not be as fun of a segment because you're not going to have huge names there. You're not going to have Jalen Hurts and Saquon and all those fun players that we've talked about all off season. But I do want to talk about the bubble player, like who's right there, who could make it, who could not make it. Because I do think there's a little bit of an art to managing the back of the roster, especially at the end of training camp when you got to get the roster down to 53. Who can you get through waivers? Who can you get to the practice squad? All those different things. So that's another thing I want to talk about, and we'll add that to the list of, names that don't get mentioned much, but do get mentioned here on Birds 365. So that should be a good segment.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. By the way, that they've liberalized the roster rules so much over the past probably 5 years. They've made it easier on the GMs. That depresses me a little bit. You can stash guys. You can, you have more practice squad players, obviously. You got pup lists, you got injured reserve. It's not, you used to be, you had to really strategize if you're concerned about losing somebody on waivers. Now you don't really have to do that as much. That's a rare part of the NFL where I'm like, come on, make it harder on them. Make it like it used to be. But it is what it is.
Johnny Mac, great show, brother. Your final thoughts on this Wednesday edition of Birds 365, wrapping up 1 week out from the first training camp practice.
Yeah, a week away. They'll be on the practice field Wednesday morning. So get ready. And you have a ramp up period, which I think maybe I'll talk about that later in the week. So, you're not going to see pads right away. You have all this collective bargaining. So that part I'll talk about. Day 1 through 3 is basically no contact. Day 4 and 5 are shells. You can wear 6 mandatory. Day off 7, you can put the pads on. Now, and that's just because you can put the pads on doesn't mean you will put the pads on. There's also limits of number of padded practices. So yeah, a lot of minutia.
No doubt, Johnny Mac. Great show today, brother. We'll catch you tomorrow on a Thursday edition of Birds 365. Thank you, brother.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right, there's Johnny Mac, John McMullen. Make sure you guys follow him on X at JF McMullen. A great show today. Great preparation for training camp.